Something weird is happening in Australia. The part of our island continent that we famously love the most, the beach, is an increasingly dangerous, even deadly place to visit, thanks to these things, great white sharks, which have been protected in all Australian waters since July 2000. In that time, great whites and two other shark species, tigers and bulls, have killed at least 54 people, 20 of them just in the past 5 years. But that's not the weird bit. The rate of attacks will continue to rise because, frankly, few people care. In fact, many Australians have come to like and even admire these dangerous, unpredictable, dumb animals. Politicians know it, and certainly the small group of scientists milking tens of millions of dollars worth of research grants know it. I've been writing and talking publicly about this topic for 10 years, and in that time, things have only got worse. I'm now one of the few people in Australia saying we need to protect human life by killing the lethal sharks that come near us. This opinion was once routine in Australia, and our beaches were safer as a result, but not anymore. How did this happen? Why is it now acceptable for Australians to be gruesomely bitten in half for doing what they were until recently famous for doing? And why am I one of the few people asking this question? I decided to find out once and for all. Join me, Fred Pawle, as I dive into what I call the heart of Sharkness. Walk down almost any street in Australia and you won't encounter a single crocodile, snake or poisonous spider. You might step on the odd dog turd, but that's about as unpleasant as it gets. We cleared our urban areas of these dangerous pests because, well, life is a whole lot easier without them. Beyond the shoreline, however, all bets are off. Enter at your own risk. And if you're attacked, well, you can't say you weren't warned. Is this a double standard? I decided to visit the aptly named Manly Beach in Sydney to find out. And, just to make sure I got a response, I came bearing a provocative message.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, what's up?
What do you think about the shark situation these days?
Oh, I think we're swimming in water, so you could expect coming across one.
There's been 20 fatalities in the last 5 years in Australia. Is that too many?
Oh, I mean, we do swim in the ocean, so...
Well, what happened to the snakes that used to live here? We got rid of them.
Well, maybe we intruded on the snakes.
So there's been 20 people killed in Australia in the past 5 years. Do you think that's too many?
Well, look, anyone dying is unfortunate, but there's probably bigger issues, I'd say, than the sharks.
So you swim in the ocean. What if it happened to you?
But I think the chances of that are pretty low. It's like asking, what if a coconut falls on your head? Should we get rid of all the coconut trees?
Well, I'm not saying get rid of all sharks. I'm just saying make the beaches safer. It's what we Australians do. We love going to the beach.
We do love going to the beach. We do love going to the beach. We want to make it safe, but I don't know if killing the sharks is the way to do it.
How else would you do it?
Well,
Is it okay to get rid of the sharks at the beaches where we go to?
I think so,
Why is that?
because it's their home.
Is a shark's life more important than a human's?
I don't believe that anything should be killed intentionally. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks.
It's their water. I feel like
But
we're
it's
their
your-
guests.
It's your water too. You love the ocean, don't you?
I do, but I don't live in it.
Yeah, but you surf in it, man. That's what we do. That's what Australians
It's
do.
true, but that's our luxury. It's not our necessity.
But they can have all the rest of the ocean, but not this bit. How's that sound?
Well, maybe they don't quite get to decide in that manner. I
Yeah.
think it might be a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah. There's been 20 people have been killed in Australia in the past 5 years. Do you think that's too many?
Maybe we shouldn't be swimming.
But we love the beach. We're Australians. That's what we do.
True.
So, do you think a shark's life is more important than a human's life?
No, that's not the question I put.
Okay. Just a couple of years ago, a 15-year-old kid was killed at York Peninsula in South Australia, surfing
Yeah.
just like you do. It's wrong.
It's the risk you take, I suppose.
I've spoken to parents who've lost kids, and they think the loss of their child was preventable. What if it happened to you?
Well, is it preventable?
That's their home. We share it. We don't have to put nets out.
What,
Use your drones and everything else.
what happened to the snakes that used to live here?
They're still here, mate.
Well, it's pretty safe to walk around here. There's no dangerous animals living on the land because we got rid of them.
You got your argument.
You've got to be joking.
Why? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with saving lives?
Save the sharks' life. Yes.
Why?
They own the ocean.
Is a shark's life more important than a human's?
Yes. Hell
Really?
yes.
Why?
Yes. Yes.
Why?
Because we are including. They live in the sea. We are more important. Tell me why we are more important.
Well, we're more talented, we're more intelligent, we love people.
How do you know that sharks don't love people either?
They eat them.
It's easy to dismiss the human cost of shark attacks if you never encounter it. Peter Edmonds was a 16-year-old student at Alstonville High School in northern New South Wales, who took the morning off during a teacher's strike to go surfing with a friend in nearby Ballina on the 8th of April 2008. He was in the water alone when he was attacked by a bull shark and bitten twice on the leg. He caught a wave to shore and died from blood loss on the sand. 17 years later, his elder sister Kylie describes the horror of that day and the trauma her family, especially their dad Neil, still endures.
I get to Ballina Hospital and I go to open the door and Phil comes over and I just looked up at him and I just went, "Is Peter okay?" And he had tears pouring down his face. And so I walked into the hospital and then Mum and Dad walked out of the store and I just dropped. So they took me into another room and I'm just like, I need to see him. Like, I don't believe that this has happened. So they go, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to see him." Went into the room and he just looked so peaceful. And I couldn't touch him. And Mum's like, "It's just Peter. It's just Peter." And she said, "He's just sandy because he's just been surfing." His whole calf muscle was gone. There was another bite in his thigh the size of a dinner plate.
What effect did it have on your dad?
Peter was his mate. So not only was he his son, he was his best mate. They did so many things together. And surfing was a big thing of what they did together. And to lose that, he would go to the longboard club to go help judge, but he'd see dads bring their kids in. And he's like, it's just a reminder of, I don't have, I joined this club with Peter. I don't have that anymore. He did go down a really dark path of depression. Like he has been diagnosed with that for a long time, but it went darker.
How dark did it get?
He became an alcoholic for a long time. And there'd be times where he would just get really dark, like a dark depression where he was contemplating. And I would just have to sit there and just be like, hey, you still have us. You have your grandchildren. Peter's only just waiting for you. And he said to you, was it a few nights after he died, he just heard Peter's voice in his head. "Hey, Dad, it's okay. Live your life. I'm still here." And he had to process a lot. And then he got a dog, and his dog's his best mate.
Oh. You said earlier that your grief is unpredictable and difficult to manage. Can you go through that again?
Some days you're fine. And then other days you can have harder days, and it just comes in waves. It doesn't matter if it's been a year or 17 years. Grief is part of who you are. So once that person goes, grief is becoming your new normal. But how you deal with that grief, if you're going to turn it into, if you're going to be angry with the world, or if you're going to look at the positives and things.
There are people who quite casually dismiss the threat of sharks in Australia at the moment and consider what you've gone through as just sort of risk of daily life in Australia. Do you think those people understand what they're talking about?
No, not overly, because they haven't lived it.
Peter Edmonds was the 13th of the 55 known fatal attacks in Australia in the 25 years since great whites were protected. Here are all of them, in chronological order, reduced to 2 minutes, including 3 people whose disappearance in the water almost certainly involved a shark, bringing the total to at least 58. You'll notice that the rate of attacks increases as protected great whites proliferate. These are just the fatalities. They don't include the 350 recorded encounters that ended in an injury, 79 of which were serious or resulted in an amputated limb. Some of these attacks would have occurred whether the great whites were protected or not, but equally others would have been avoided had we not allowed these lethal sharks to proliferate off our beaches. Every one of these fatalities caused trauma, even in people not directly involved. The parents of kids who regularly go to the beach where the attack happened, for example, also suffer. A mother in Ballina, where Peter was killed, told me during the spate of attacks there in 2015 how distressing it was to see her teenage son run out the door with his surfboard under his arm and wonder, every time, if she would ever see him again. Then, of course, there are people whose child, spouse or parent is never recovered. The father of one young man taken in an attack once told me how nothing had changed in the 25 years since his son was killed, because he and his wife never got to hold a funeral and can't visit his grave. They are trapped in a world where the loss forever feels like it happened only yesterday. These tragedies are becoming normalised in Australia. But should they? You would think that something as consequential as protecting great white sharks would have been debated in federal parliament before it was even implemented. And the first question you would expect someone to ask in that debate is, how do we know great white sharks need to be protected anyway? As it turns out, even the experts weren't sure. A report released by the Environment Department in 2002 admitted the current population status of white sharks in Australia is difficult to assess. But they went along with it anyway because, despite the inadequacies in the available data, there appears to be an overall long-term decline in abundance of white sharks in Australian waters. There appears to be? Well, that sounds a bit flimsy, don't you think? The experts based this assumption on 3 indices: the number of sharks caught in protective nets at New South Wales and Queensland beaches, game fishing catches in New South Wales and South Australia, and anecdotal sighting frequencies by tourism operators and divers in South Australia. Remember that word anecdotal, because we will come back to it when the so-called experts use it a couple of decades later to argue exactly the opposite. One of the authors of that 2002 report, Queensland scientist Jeff McPherson, told me in 2017 nobody in the world had any idea of the global population of great whites. People were suggesting that the global population was declining, but in terms of absolute numbers, nobody had any idea. So protecting these things was questionable from the start. The other reason this might have warranted the attention of our elected representatives is the potential human cost of increasing the number of man-eating sharks at our beaches. The Environment Minister at the time was South Australian Liberal Senator Robert Hill. I rang him in July and he agreed to try to answer questions via email about the decisions made 25 years ago. I asked, on whose advice was protection of great whites introduced, and was this issue ever debated in Parliament? He didn't even reply. A search of Hansard yields no evidence of any debate at all. Instead, protection was simply implemented through an automatic process overseen by government departments that would later receive millions of dollars in shark-related research grants. A mere 2 months after protection was introduced, great white sharks killed 2 young surfers 300 kilometres apart on consecutive days in South Australia, and nobody in authority raised an eyebrow. Barry Bruce of the CSIRO, who was the nation's leading shark researcher at the time, dismissed the significance of the attacks happening in succession, saying instead they were a tragic coincidence. But then again, concern for human safety wasn't really part of this program, at least not initially. That 2002 report from the Environment Department covered every imaginable aspect of protecting great white sharks, except the most important one: the consequences for surfers, swimmers and divers. Under the heading Promote Community Education and Awareness of White Sharks, it simply said the government should develop a community education strategy for safe swimming guidelines and safe diving guidelines. In other words, tell people to get used to encountering more lethal sharks when they go in the water. The research grants started flowing soon afterwards, a large chunk of which was for scientists to catch, tag and release hundreds of great whites over the ensuing 25 years. Initially, this was meant to help experts predict great white behaviour. Barry Bruce told the ABC in 2006, information about where sharks are likely to be can be used to look after people. Well, that idea didn't last long. A scientific report into all this tagging and monitoring 9 years later, co-authored by Bruce, said that there was virtually no pattern at all in the movement of great white sharks. There was considerable variability in the direction and timing of individual great white sharks' movements, and few clear patterns in seasonal movement directions were observed. By then, spates of attacks, unpredicted by the experts, had become the new normal in Australia. When persistent sightings of great white sharks caused the beaches of Newcastle to be closed for 10 consecutive days in December 2016, the Today Show on Channel 9 invited Bruce on to explain what was happening. He started by chastising the host for mischaracterising the shark's behaviour.
Let's be clear about a few things. I think we should stop using the terms lurking, menacing and stalking. All those terms do is scare people. In fact, these sharks are swimming naturally in their natural environment in places where it's quite common and normal for them to be. They aren't doing none of those things of lurking and stalking and menacing. They're just undertaking their normal behaviour.
He then subtly revealed a significant turning point in this entire debate.
If somebody's seen a 5-metre white shark up there, sure, that's a little unusual. It's not unheard of. They pass through that area quickly. But sharks of 2 to 3 metres, particularly up towards a 3-metre size, for somebody who hasn't seen a shark that size, a white shark in particular, it looks very, very big. And you should treat animals like that with respect.
Show respect for sharks? Why? Bruce didn't say. But to be fair to him, he didn't need to, because by then the zeitgeist had changed. To understand how much it had changed, we need to go even further back to the first spate of shark attacks in Australia in the 1930s. When 9 people were killed in Sydney in the 3 years to March 1937, the New South Wales government responded by creating the Shark Menace Advisory Committee, which recommended a novel solution: nets at popular beaches that didn't enclose the beach but entrapped and killed any large shark that happened to swim through them. The first nets were installed in October 1937. Here is a graph of all the fatal attacks at all beaches in New South Wales before the introduction of nets. And here is a graph of the fatal attacks at protected New South Wales beaches since then. And just to emphasise the point, here are the fatal attacks at unprotected beaches compared to protected beaches in New South Wales since 1937. A similar result was achieved in Queensland, where nets and another form of lethal protection, drum lines, were introduced in 1962. As in New South Wales, there have been only 2 deaths at protected beaches in Queensland since then. So when a spate of 14 attacks occurred in New South Wales in 2015, including 1 fatality and 3 serious injuries, you might have expected State Premier Mike Baird to respond by installing more nets or reconvening the Shark Menace Advisory Committee. But he didn't. Instead, he hosted a shark summit for the world's leading shark experts and put $16 million on the table for them to come up with new ways to solve a problem that had in fact been solved almost a century earlier. Why the need for a new approach? What had changed? Well, to put it simply, Australia had embraced the zeitgeist, common now in most Western countries, that considers the natural environment sacred and all human activity destructive. Protecting humans by killing sharks has not only become an old-fashioned idea, it's now downright selfish, if not sinister. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, himself a novice but keen surfer, is one of the few politicians in Australia, current or former, willing to defy this deadly zeitgeist.
I have no reason not to want great white sharks to survive in the wild, but it seems from reports from fishermen that great white shark numbers have well and truly recovered, and obviously we've now got a lot of shark attacks around our coasts which we didn't have in previous times, and this is why I think it's time to reconsider the whole question of protection, particularly protection in areas close to the coast, and to reconsider whether then there might not be a case for reintroducing some form of a commercial shark fishery.
Why are you one of the few politicians who would say, or former politicians, who would say that, Tony?
Well, I just think that as a matter of principle, people come before sharks. Dangerous animals need to be dealt with appropriately when there is a conflict between human safety and animal protection. When there is a conflict between human safety and animal protection, within reason, human safety must come first.
Why is it difficult for politicians to overrule experts in situations like this? Because there's a lot of reluctance politically to even contemplate lifting protection.
Well, I suppose because the experts, in inverted commas, often have an axe to grind, and politicians who are subject to a lot of public criticism are often reluctant to take on experts who are assumed to be beyond public criticism. But in the end, so much of this is a question not of actual expertise, but of value judgments. And when value judgments are being considered, the elected and accountable politicians' value judgment, I think, is normally to be preferred to the mere experts, because the expert might be a captive of the subject matter.
I have been out vox popping, or talking to ordinary Australians on the beach, asking them whether shark's life is more important than a human's. And disturbingly, I've found a majority of people think that the ocean is the shark's home. If we enter the water, it's at our own risk, and if a person dies, so be it. That sounds harsh, but that's the opinion I've got on beaches in Australia. Do you think politicians are cynically sort of gauging that opinion and risking Australian human lives as a result?
My issue is, how do we best manage the shark population, given that there are lots of people who use our beaches, enjoy our beaches. Our beaches are an iconic part of the Australian way of life, and if they ever became much more dangerous, I think an element of our way of life could be lost. So I think it's a question of managing the interaction between sharks and people, and I would have thought that some form of fishery would be something that could be quite reconciled with the ongoing flourishing of the species, given that we have all sorts of other managed fisheries off our coasts. And certainly the current system of protection for beaches in the Sydney and Newcastle areas of meshing, I think certainly should be preserved, because as we know, there hasn't been a fatal shark attack on a Sydney beach, on a meshed beach, for something like 80 or 90 years since the meshing was introduced. And certainly at a time of an increasing shark population and therefore an increasing danger to beach users, you certainly don't want to remove existing forms of protection for beach users.
Tragically, 2 weeks after that interview was recorded, 57-year-old surfer Mercury Salakis was attacked and killed by a great white shark at nearby DY Beach, where meshing or nets were actually in place. Salakis' death ends a 74-year run of the nets preventing fatal attacks in New South Wales. But this wasn't a sign that the nets don't work. Rather, it was a sign that, as Tony Abbott says, the size and abundance of sharks, especially great whites, are increasing. New South Wales Primary Industries Minister Tara Moriarty, who ignored an invitation to be interviewed for this documentary, had the previous summer removed some nets 1 month early to appease the environmentalists upset about their lethal effect not only on targeted sharks but also on non-targeted species like dolphins and turtles. She had planned to go one better this summer by not installing nets at all at some beaches, but after Salakis' death, her boss, Premier Chris Minns, sensibly said the nets would stay. What'll happen next summer is anyone's guess. If anybody knows how big and abundant sharks have become in Australia, it's fishermen. And here are 4 of them who say the numbers are dangerously out of control and authorities don't care.
When I first started in the mid-90s, it was nothing like this. We used to catch sharks then.
Yeah.
We had a market for them. Then we were stopped from doing that. The market ran out. And since then, it's just been an increase. The last probably 5 years, the most amount of whites I've ever seen since I've been here.
How did that market get shut down? What happened?
I think it was, not too sure whether it just shut down. There wasn't a demand for it anymore. It could have been political.
People stopped buying, or you were told not to stop?
We were told to stop catching them. We weren't allowed to catch them anymore.
So those sharks aren't being caught anymore. Do you think the white numbers are exponentially increasing?
Oh, totally, yeah. So obviously they're breeding and they're getting more. We're not allowed to catch them. They're just taking over. They're starting to take over.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's becoming a big problem even with the amount of attacks we've had over the last 5-8 years. It's just something's got to be done.
Do you have sharks following your boat?
Oh, every night is like behind the boat. You could just about walk on them.
What sort of sharks are they?
Tigers, Yeah, all species. There's probably whites there. A lot of them we don't see. The whites will generally hang down lower, but I've seen some big ones, especially off Evans Head, between Evans Head and Byron Bay. Seen some really big great whites.
How big?
I'm talking 10, 12 foot. Yeah, so 3-4 metres. Yeah, and round, like big female round ones.
So the shark experts would probably say that the sharks have learned to follow your boats because there's probably a feed in it, but the numbers haven't increased. What would you say to that?
Oh, no, I disagree with that. The numbers increased, tenfold.
How long were you the resident shark fisherman in Ballina?
Just over 15 years.
When did you finish?
2015, roughly.
What were you catching?
Mainly tiger sharks, whalers, silky whalers, odd hammerhead.
And great whites?
An odd one, one a month when they were coming past. And most of the whalers would be between 10 and 12 feet long, and the tiger sharks would be probably average about 14 foot.
And when you finished catching them, then the attack started?
Oh, more or less, yeah.
Do you think there's a connection there?
Well, it's a heck of a coincidence.
Are there more sharks out there now?
Yes, without a doubt. You know, like, there's definitely a heck of a lot more great whites, and sharks in general. There's definitely a lot more.
You've tried to warn people, you've been quite vocal. Do you think that the people who are behind the restriction of shark fishing and the protection of great whites, do you think they're responsible for the deaths that have happened and the injuries and the attacks?
I do, yeah, I do. Fisheries, they've got to be, they're making decisions which are affecting people's lives. They've got to be held to it, held accountable for what they do.
Between Portland and Victoria and Sojourner here in South Australia, there would have been approximately 80 to 100 shark boats. And
how long ago was that?
Oh, that was in the 60s, 70s and 80s and into the 90s. So now there'd only be sometimes none, but 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 at the most in South Australia.
So how much has the shark population rebounded since then?
Oh, quite a lot. We're talking the gummies and schoolies. Obviously there's a lot more white pointers around now too.
Yeah.
Because all those boats used to catch them as a bit of a bycatch, and that's not happening anymore.
How many white pointers were being caught back in those days?
Just from my experience, we'd catch maybe anywhere from 2 or 3 to 6 or 8 in a season. So if you extrapolate those, let's say we only caught 5, or extrapolate those numbers over that many boats. Plus there was game fishermen catching as well, so maybe with those all together, there's quite a lot.
And that all ended in 1999?
Yeah.
Did you see a sudden turnaround in white pointers at that point?
Probably not a sudden turnaround, but over a few years. I've been at sea for 56 years and it's the most I've ever seen, yeah. I used to go surfing and diving and swimming, but I don't anymore, and I don't want my kids to either.
I can say without a doubt that at the peak of the great white interactions that I was having, personally, I was killing 25 to 50 great whites a year, personally, in my own fishing operations.
And that was early 90s?
Early 90s through when there was some great white. There was 30 boats fishing. And I was one boat catching 25 to 50 a year. So even if everybody averaged 10 sharks a year, it was still, 300 or 400 sharks a year that were being killed. Now we don't have any sharks being killed. Therefore, the great white population has exploded.
If they don't do anything, what'll happen?
There's going to be another attack, and another attack, and another attack, and I think after 3 to 5 more attacks on the west coast, there will be nobody in the water. The whole west coast is dangerous though. I don't think people really... I've fished from one end to the other, and there's great whites frequenting this coastline everywhere now.
Shark experts dispute these observations. In March this year, The Guardian quoted Vincent Raoult of Griffith University saying there simply is no data to back up anecdotal reports of increasing shark numbers. And in 2019, Blake Chapman of the University of Queensland said in the university's Contact magazine, "People are now looking for sharks and talking about shark sightings like never before. So really, it's not surprising that we're seeing, but mostly talking about, sharks more often. This creates a perception that shark populations are increasing." She added in a piece in the Australian Geographic website, "Although sharks are clearly being seen and talked about more, which is often interpreted as population booms, science is still suggesting otherwise." At the Senate Environment Committee's shark mitigation hearings in 2017, senior CSIRO scientist Nick Bax was asked what he thought of previous testimony to the inquiry that anecdotal sightings suggested an explosion in the number of great whites. Bax replied, "There's no scientific estimate of the trend to show an explosion." Remember, anecdotal evidence was one of the indices used by experts in 2002 to argue that great whites were in decline. 15 years later, anecdotal evidence of an increase, which is supported by a steady increase in attacks on people, which you can see in this graph of total fatal and serious attacks across Australia since 2000, is summarily dismissed by the same type of experts. This blithe dismissal of anecdotal sightings is often accompanied by attempts to downplay the significance of shark attacks themselves, starting with the language used to describe them. "They're not attacks for a start," says University of Sydney academic Christopher Pepin-Neff. "Rather, they should be called shark bite incidents, even if the incident is fatal, because sharks don't intentionally eat humans. There is no evidence of any shark ever getting a taste for human flesh," he said in a TED Talk in 2011. Well, that's not true. The fatal attacks on Cameron Bays in 2000, Jared Stebbins in 2005 and Ben Linden in 2013, among many others, were either repeat attacks or horrifyingly prolonged, proving that sharks are not deterred by the taste of human flesh. Here's footage of an attack by a bull shark on a 16-year-old boy at Cabarita in New South Wales in June, in which the shark, after biting the boy on the arm and leg, follows him and his rescuers all the way to the sand. Pepin-Neff says the reporting of attacks like this is unduly influenced by what he calls the Jaws effect, which portrays sharks as bloodthirsty predators in a perpetual battle with humans. This is itself a gross exaggeration of the media's reporting of shark attacks, but be that as it may, he says the time has come to address shark bites in Australia from a reasoned, scientific point of view. Well, Pepin-Neff is correct that there is a Jaws effect, but it's not the type that he imagines. What most people have forgotten about Jaws is that the shark is only a bit player in the main drama, which revolves around a greedy real estate mogul called Larry Vaughan, who is desperate to downplay a series of shark attacks in a small coastal summer holiday town in order to protect his real estate investments. In a key moment in the book, Vaughan, sounding conspicuously like a member of the Australian shark research establishment, says, "Maybe we're overreacting to this whole thing. Let's discuss this rationally." Pepin-Neff could not have put it better. The problem with most academics in this field is that they have a conflict of interest. They know that if they ever agreed with the anecdotal evidence that shark numbers are now out of control, a significant portion of their academic expertise would no longer be required. This might explain why so many shark researchers are so reluctant to estimate how many sharks are really lurking off our beaches and whether the number is increasing or decreasing. On the rare occasions that experts have discussed this topic, they've either argued that the population has flatlined since protection began, or they still don't have enough data to reach an accurate estimate of the population trend. In February 2018, for example, the CSIRO published findings of research using state-of-the-art DNA technology to calculate how many great whites were living off Australian beaches. It said, "We estimate the size of the East Australian and New Zealand adult white shark population to be 280 to 650 individuals. Estimated total population size is 2,500 to 6,750. Let me repeat that. Estimated total population size is somewhere between 2,500 and a figure more than twice that, 6,750. This is supposedly the result of extensive cutting-edge research which Australians waited 18 years to receive. But it gets worse. Vague though that rough estimation was, it still shed virtually no light on the more important aspect, which is whether the population has finally started to increase again. The same report said, "Our current data are not yet sufficient to estimate population trend. The most we can say at present is that the current estimates of abundance are more consistent with slight current declines or zero population rate of change." The CSIRO's Nick Bax told the Senate inquiry in 2017 that a more accurate estimation of the trend would soon be available. "Our current best guess is that it's going to be a question of a number of years before we can provide an estimate of the trend, rather than a decade." A number of years rather than a decade? Well, it's now 8 years later and the CSIRO still hasn't published a proper scientific analysis of the trend. Meanwhile, fishermen keep posting anecdotal evidence of an explosion of sharks. As George Orwell said in 1984, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." Dan Webber is a veteran surfer from Ballina who had a few close calls of his own during the spate of attacks there almost a decade ago, and is now a vocal critic of the state government's flawed approach to preventing shark attacks. He's written extensively on the topic for Spectator Australia, among other publications. He says his scant interactions with scientists at the state's Department of Primary Industries confirms to him that their main priority is sharks, not people.
I don't know why these scientists aren't more concerned about the fate of shark attack victims. It seems like they've lost their humanity, but I don't know that they are evil people. I wouldn't go so far as to say that, because I mean I can't judge what these people are like. That's why I'm more inclined to think that they are serving a purpose which is to do with politics. I have a feeling that they're more concerned with how things look than how they actually function. And so, whereas you could...
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's because the environmental lobby is a vocal minority that has a lot of control over the government, and unfortunately the silent majority doesn't seem to stand up for us. They're just not interested in the victims of shark attacks. The families, the suffering, I mean, we experienced the whole community suffering for 2 years. It was extraordinary. I mean, it was tormenting. We would hear helicopters overhead every day. Every time you heard a siren, you think, oh my God, who's next?
When you say they're more interested in how it looks, what impression are they trying to give?
They call it a dual objective, the dual objective of protecting sharks and people, okay? And as far as I can tell, they can't do that.
What's the solution, in your opinion? You've done a lot of research into this topic, you've lived in it, you've lived it, you've seen it happen. What do you think the solution is?
Well, what I'd like to see is honesty by the government. It's quite obvious that you would have to reduce, and I think they know this, that you would have to reduce the number of sharks in order to cut down on the number of shark attacks. It's as simple as that. And it's just unfortunate that it's going to take another 10 shark attacks before the penny drops.
The New South Wales government's main and most expensive method of trying to minimise shark attacks is essentially a warning system. 37 electronic listening devices anchored in the water off popular beaches around the coast alert surf lifesavers every time a shark, fitted with a beeping tag, swims within range. The government has tagged about 2,000 sharks over the years, but nobody knows how many of those sharks are still alive or how many of the tags have simply fallen off. The main figure determining the effectiveness of this program, however, is what percentage of the total number of great white, tiger and bull sharks have been tagged. If it's a low percentage, as most fishermen say it is, then this system is pretty much useless because the majority of sharks can still lurk among swimmers and surfers undetected. More disturbingly, have tagged sharks been involved in attacks? Again, the government is circumspect about this. We know, however, that a tagged great white was detected at Foster Beach on the same day that surfer Mark Sanguinetti was killed at adjacent Tuncurry in May 2021. And a tagged shark was detected at Narrabeen 10 hours before Mercury Salakis was killed 2 kilometres away at Dee Why in September this year. Another, or the same shark, was detected off nearby Manly 2 days later. These are just 2 examples where a more lethal mitigation strategy might have saved 2 lives. The ineffectiveness of the listening devices was confirmed in a report co-written by Darryl McPhee of Bond University for the New South Wales government in 2022. The effectiveness of VR 4G tagged shark listening stations as a shark bite reduction system is not apparent. At most beaches where VR 4G shark listening stations were deployed, there were marginally fewer interactions compared with a similar period prior to their deployment. In the south region, there was actually an increase in interactions. The same report also found, however, that the smart drum lines were having a deterrent effect. On the state's north coast, there had been no interactions when the gear was operating, compared with 11 interactions within a similar period prior to the initial deployment. These smart drum lines, it should be pointed out, were not designed as a deterrent. Rather, they are meant to simply catch sharks so they can be tagged and released. Strange as it may seem, the revelation that the smart drumlines act as a deterrent bolsters the argument why the other mitigation strategy, nets, has also had a statistically high success rate in preventing attacks. And believe it or not, there is a simple, plausible explanation for it. Researchers aboard a shark cage diving boat at the Neptune Islands in South Australia in 2015 witnessed 2 orcas attack and kill a great white. This is a spot where 81% of the day trips for cage diving tourists successfully encounter great whites. But after this incident, the sharks stayed away for several weeks, to the point where the boat operators started to worry if their businesses could survive and lobbied the state government for permission to operate elsewhere. An almost identical incident involving orcas and great whites was witnessed by another group of scientists at the Farallon Islands off California in 1997, after which great whites also avoided the location for months. Well, you could say it was the orcas, which are higher up the food chain, that scared the great whites away. But it's arguably simpler than that. In a seminal book called Shark Attack by Sydney surgeon Victor Coppelson, published in 1958, a fisherman from Western Australia is quoted describing how he stopped large groups of sharks stealing his catch and generally menacing his boat. The most successful method we have found to deal with attacking sharks in Norwegian Bay is with a .303 rifle and soft-nosed ammunition. This method requires sharks to come to the surface, and a good headshot, or one towards the head from the dorsal fin, is usually enough to kill it. From our experience, dead sharks on the bottom are the best repellent available. Repeatedly, after shooting a number of sharks around our whale buoys, we have gone for periods of from 10 to 14 days without even seeing a shark in the bay. Graham Tapley in Port Lincoln, South Australia, has also witnessed the phenomenon. He says when he was fishing for gummy and school sharks, he never threw the heads and guts overboard at the same place he caught them, because if he did, the next time he tried to fish there, the sharks would be gone. He says the same applies to great whites.
If you see one swimming around in a popular surfing spot, well, yeah, take that one and maybe get scientists to have a look at it and dissect it and find out what they can, but most importantly, take it back where they killed it and leave it there. And they won't come back for a long time. So you're only killing one shark, but you're probably saving human lives. So.
Well, that would require a level of pragmatism and common sense that's well beyond most current Australian politicians. Besides, as you've probably noticed by now, the reason sharks are being protected is not only to solve some environmental issue, legitimate or otherwise, they're also being protected because they are often seen as, how do I put this, supreme, even godlike creatures. The evidence of this is everywhere. In his 2009 book called Shark in Peril in the Sea, for example, Australian author David Owen says sharks have much to teach us about the art of survival. Or they would if they knew how to talk or had fingers with which to type their survival tips into a computer. In this book, simply called Great White, published in 2014, fellow Australian author James Woodford recounts diving with great whites at the Neptune Islands in South Australia and says, "The white sharks of the Neptune Islands call no man master. But we diminish ourselves if we pretend that we do not, as the sea and the land's two great predators share some kind of common bond of power." By the end of the book, Woodford has thrown off what few inhibitions he has about worshipping these giant beasts. A white shark is simply a wondrous thing, a work of art, he says. The great white shark, monarch of the oceans, a beautiful animal. An exhibition about sharks at the Australian Museum in Sydney in 2022 endowed sharks with the equivalent of university degrees, describing them as ecosystem engineers who keep different parts of the ecosystem in check by controlling the populations they prey. It's no surprise that this reverence for sharks is also felt among the people who work with them. Department of Primary Industries fisheries technician Alyssa Kanyasi said on Instagram earlier this year, "Every shark I tag fills me with the same excitement as the first one. There's always that sense of awe about these incredible animals." I could go on. Shark worship is ubiquitous these days. You honestly have to keep reminding yourself that sharks, especially great whites, are just dumb animals with more teeth than brains. In contrast to this, there's often a lack of compassion or charity for the victims of shark attacks. Every time there's an attack, posts about it on social media are flooded with comments like this one. "Dear humans, the ocean is not shark infested, it's life infested. It was our home long before it became your playground." A mere 10 days after Mercury Solarcus was killed, Greens politician Kate Fairman told State Parliament that his death was a tragic and unavoidable accident. She then went on to express greater concern not for Solarcus's family and friends, but for the fish and other marine life accidentally killed in the nearby shark nets, and called for them to be removed. When 16-year-old Stella Berry was killed by a bull shark while swimming in the Swan River at Fremantle in 2023, state and local governments responded by banning the fishing of sharks. Bull sharks are now more common in the Swan than they've ever been. And this month, at the start of summer, the West Australian government issued a fresh warning to swimmers and surfers about great whites off Perth's beaches. You can't help thinking that this is part of the plan, that the ultimate objective of these miserable shark huggers is to stop other people enjoying one of our island continent's greatest assets, its glorious coastline. Few people outside surfing realise this, but South Australia has some of the best surf in the world. The locals have kept a lid on it, but for 50 years now, hardcore surfers have moved there to get away from crowds and immerse themselves in consistently world-class waves. Local legend Jeff Schmucker, who you can see here towing his son Josiah from a jet ski onto waves at 3 of the coastline's premier breaks, says surfing will, however, soon no longer be viable on the naturally wild and beautiful west coast of South Australia.
The impact of what's happening with sharks on the west coast of South Australia is going to affect this community from Port Lincoln through to Fowler's Bay in a financial way that's going to blow people out. It's going to cost millions because of lack of young people moving here, schools. You know, we have a lot of surfing community in Streaky Bay that recently have bought blocks for young people from all over Australia. And these blocks are coming up for sale. They're turning around and leaving because it is too dangerous to surf here anymore. The risk of being affected by the trauma of a shark attack or being involved in a shark attack, it's going through the roof.
Well, I mean, we've got waves here today. That's surfable out there. Granites is a great wave. There's no one out.
No, well, people have stopped surfing granites because of the 2 shark attacks are here at this location. But all the people that I know that have seen these attacks they're going to be seriously affected. And I can see it already with those kids. It's going to break their hearts, you know.
Do you think the government cares?
I went to a Streaky Bay Business and Tourism Association meeting, and from that level to the federal government, they don't care. It's over.
Yeah.
What can people don't understand about that? And after another 3 to 5 attacks, people will understand that it's over, and we'll eventually turn our backs on it and walk away from the ocean, which is sad.
Like me, you might have noticed that Australia is vastly different to what it was just a generation ago. We used to relish our freedom, our larrikin humour, and our enthusiasm for outdoor adventure. And this made our nation one of the most envied in the world. But joyless, authoritarian busybodies have killed most of that. It's time we fought back. We must end the protection of stupid great white sharks, install nets and drum lines at all popular beaches around the country, and restart managed shark fisheries in every state to keep the numbers under control. After 10 years of covering this topic, I'm finally starting to get the feeling that the mood is shifting. People who once thought that dangerous sharks should be left alone are now starting to realise that making beaches safer with lethal deterrents will not cause widespread destruction of the marine environment, despite what the self-interested boffins say. The whole program to protect sharks was ill-considered from the start. It's time we got our priorities right again and returned to protecting humans instead.